Welcome to Essential Dynamics. I'm your host, Derek Hudson. I'm developing a framework called Essential Dynamics, which helps us learn how to run our lives and organizations better. Picking up a conversation that we started last time with Ann Hall about the Edmonton Grads. Ann, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
And that was such a great conversation about the Grads. They were dominant in their sport in the world for 25 years. And I had, when I was thinking about season 5 of this podcast, decided that what I really wanted to do was to focus on system flow and try to find examples of organizations and systems that just had flow. And we talk about flow in different ways, but it's kind of like you know it when you see it. And so I was trying to think of examples, and it came up with the idea of the Edmonton Grads. And so I researched a little bit online and found the book that Ann wrote. And then I found Ann here in our lovely city of Edmonton. And I had a hypothesis that there must have been system flow present in the way the Grads were operated to be so dominant for so long and to perform at such a high level for so long. And I think that I found it. And so I want to explore that with Ann. I did find some nuggets in the book. And I'm going to start with this, and that is that systems have a purpose. And in fact, one of the ways that a system is defined is it's a group of interrelated activities that come together to achieve a purpose. And in Essential Dynamics, we like to talk about having two purposes that are complementary. And what I was able to discern from studying the Grads, I just want to test this on you, was that the two purposes, which we call Purpose X and Purpose Y for the Grads, could be stated as something like Purpose X was to provide these young women with the opportunity to grow and develop as people and as athletes, and to have great experiences that would serve them well in life. And the other one was to refine and promote the game of basketball. And they're not at odds, but they're not really the same thing. Would that be fair to say that was in J. Percy Page's mind when he started and as he had this great run?
Yes, I think so. Of course, I could never, I didn't interview Percy Page. And one thing that you have to remember is that as much as I searched and searched and searched, I could never find his records. Which would have been really interesting because he was an incredible businessman. Mm-hmm. He had help with that, but I think I'm not sure where those records are, whether they got lost in any of his moves, or I also came to the conclusion that perhaps he destroyed them for whatever his reasons were. And Page himself was really, the Grads considered him almost in some ways like a father figure. In fact, there were several Grads who had lost their father, but when they married, Page took them down the aisle as a substitute father.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, and he was supported in all this, and I think this is something that's not really known a lot, is that he was highly supported by his wife. Mm-hmm. Who I think I might have mentioned in the last episode that when they traveled, she was very much concerned that these young women who would never have had an opportunity, as working class women, never have had an opportunity to go to Europe themselves. She made sure that they understood the countries that they were in, the culture of the country, and they did things that allowed them to have a much broader education than it would by just simply playing basketball. So, I mean, I think this whole thing was really much, much bigger than just basketball.
Sure.
It was the means by which they could travel. It was the means by which they became well known. It was the means by which they had fun. But it was much, much bigger than basketball.
And at the same time, they were leaders in developing women's basketball or
Um,
basketball in general, like in terms of the
yes,
skill on the court.
they were, but again, you have to remember that as basketball developed in, excuse me, in this country, there were two sets of rules: women's rules and men's rules. And the women's rules came mainly from the United States of women physical educators who were concerned about overexertion, about women becoming less than what they should be if they played men's rules and so on. And so they maintained, and there were many women, and particularly in Ontario, physical educators who insisted that we, because I'm part of that generation, played women's rules. Page didn't seem this was something that he never even encountered as far as I could concerned. I wish I could have talked to him about it, but they always played men's rules. And it was partly also because of the teams that came up from the United States who were from the factory teams, the industrial teams, they played men's rules. So they had to really, if they wanted to compete with those teams, they had to play men's rules.
So if I want to pick up on that, so the college teams would be more inclined to play the women's rules, and the industrial teams were playing the men's rules.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the men's rules were similar to the game we know today. There was 5 players, full court, everyone can score.
Yes.
No 3-point line, no shot clock, but still,
exactly.
It's the game.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the women's was more of a like you're in a zone and you.
Yes, and you could only play 2/3 of the court. If you were a guard, you couldn't go into the forward area, and if you were,
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it was anyway.
Okay, but then the other thing is that one of the things I noted, and it's such a fun little point in your book, is that the pages, is it Maud, Percy and Maud, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Percy and Maud kept track of all of the descendants of the Grads. Like you said, they walked some down the aisle, but they had their collection of, grandchildren or something like that, and they kept track of them.
I think it was more the Grads themselves. The Grads really created a club. And,
okay.
And they had regular reunions. And as the Grads, formed their own families and had their own children, and some moved away and so on. But it was really a very, very interesting and tight club. If you had been a grad, then all of your descendants and all of your family and your husbands and so on, they were all welcome, and they all came back for reunions.
Uh-huh.
And Page, when he was alive, and his wife also, Maud, were very much a part of those reunions.
So the thing that I picked up from that, to this theory that perhaps women's bodies weren't up for exertion, was that they had lots of children. They were at the national average for live births or whatever statistic you would track.
Of course, I mean
what we found out from that is that women are capable of contact sports and high exertion and playing games that people want to watch, and Page never gave that a moment's thought, I don't think.
And that's interesting because as far as I can tell, and of course, I wish I had been able to talk to Mr. Page himself. And that was never an aspect of his thinking. Never an aspect, as far as I could see. What was far more important to the Pages and Mr. Page was their behavior.
Right.
Off the court, on the court, in their lives themselves. Quite frankly, there were a couple of grads whose personal lives, let's say, it went a little bit askew, and they were not welcome at the reunions. So he had these incredibly high standards for these women in terms of their behavior.
And you said last time that people told you were going to find a dictator, and when you looked at the accounts and talked to people, it was not that. But he did have high standards.
He had high standards, but he had the respect of every single grad. I was able to, as I said before, interview 4 of them, and all of them in their very old age at that time still had enormous respect for that man.
So let's talk about the system that he created. And I've got a way to think about that, and I'm not going to preach about it here. I'm just going to kind of grab elements. So they're very clear that this was not just about basketball.
Yes.
So that this was about developing young women into happy, productive, contributing members of society in many ways. And
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Basketball as a forum for that. So I refer to that as sort of like value flow. Our systems need to produce the thing that they were intended to produce. And he had a way of doing that, and he just did it on the court. The other thing that is necessary to have a sustainable system is it needs to be able to generate the resources it needs to function. And when I'm talking about a business, I make a distinction between value flow, which is, producing a product for a customer, and cash flow, which is how those resources flow back into the system so you can keep doing it. And Coach Page was also the business manager. And somehow he came up with a sustainable system for managing cash flow to the point where they could go on these trips, travel to this U.S., travel to the world, keep the team functioning over many years. How did he do that?
I think he had help. And I think the help came in large measure from the Rotarians. He was a Rotarian. They had quite a bit of fundraising on behalf of the Grads, and they would look after that. They would employ the Rotarians, of course, for businessmen and own businesses, and they would employ, when the Grads graduated from the commercial, they would employ them in their businesses. And when they did, they made sure that the summer holidays they had coincided with the barnstorming trips that they were going to take down into the States. They helped raise funds. It was fairly costly for them to travel to Europe on the three Olympics, and then also to 1932 to the Los Angeles Olympics. They helped raise money for that. This whole thing, when you look at it, it's all connected because the Rotarians understood very clearly that the Grads could promote the city and help them develop this growing small town at the time, but small business, and bring in the kind of people that were needed to make it grow. So, and Page understood that, even though he was a teacher, for some reason, he really clearly understood that. And sorry.
No, that's great. So he had a product that the community bought in many ways. I mean, they showed up at the arena, and there was the gate receipts, which I'm sure weren't enough. I mean, they clearly weren't enough. But then he had these business people in the community who saw the product of the Grads either as the players themselves and their employees, sort of, I guess, the marketing and branding opportunities that put the city on the map in Europe and places like that. Mm-hmm. And just the wholesome story and all that came together. And so it was worth the Rotarians and the individual businesses to support them over many, many years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think what's so interesting is that I'm not sure it started out that way.
Right.
I mean, you had these young women graduating, and they played basketball, and they came to their teacher, who was their phys ed teacher, and he said, we want to keep playing basketball. And I'm not sure that this was in his mind when they started all this. Well, as I said, I repeat, I wish I could have spoken to him and asked him.
Yeah, he's the right man for the job. So let's talk a little bit about his leadership. And then I want to talk about the Grads themselves. And so one of the things that Essential Dynamics is very interested in organizations is there's always this potential conflict between people as individuals wanting to be autonomous and in charge of themselves and do things their own way, and then needing to join a group, and they need to conform and cooperate in a group setting. And one of the things that I learned about the Grads is that they very much had a team approach to everything. They didn't run their basketball system on having stars. It was very much focused on team play, but there were very specific expectations within that system, both for personal deportment when they were traveling and also how they played the game. How did the coach manage to strike that balance so well for so long?
I think because he knew his players. I mean, I think there's only two players in the entire grad history, which is, and there are 38 altogether, who didn't actually go to school at commercial at McDougall.
Mm-hmm.
So when they came in to play, and also you have to remember that as the grads developed, there were a whole series of basically farm teams. And he also brought in other coaches so that he didn't have to look after them all. And so you would have them playing with the Gradettes, for example, which was the farm team just underneath the Grads. But there were several other teams below that. So that you had eventually over the years, the 25 years that they played, they had developed this incredible farm system.
Mm-hmm.
And so that and Page would have known the young women as they came into the school because he was there teaching, and he would have known them right from the very beginning as they moved up through the different levels that he had developed. So my understanding was that it wasn't, if you misbehaved or you crossed him or then he knew that very much from the beginning, and then you never had a chance to move up into the other system so that you became a grad.
And so that culture that the grads had, if we want to call it that, was consistent with the farm teams.
Yes.
And you grew up in the culture, and that's just the way it was.
Exactly. Yeah. And he, he was, I hate to use the word stern because maybe that would look like it today, but I mean, you must remember that we're dealing with a time period in which, quite frankly, women weren't as free as they are today. The behaviors were, understanding of womanly behavior was different. So it's a different kind of culture in the grads grew up in. But he was stern and yet fair. And my understanding was that most of his players loved him. I mean, he was a father figure to many of them, especially if they had lost their own father.
So he was that, I guess, the archetypical father that has high expectations.
Oh, absolutely,
and expects you to show up and work and pick yourself up when you get knocked down
exactly,
and things
absolutely.
like that. You also said in our previous conversation that he was an exemplar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you meant by that was that he had a man who held himself to all the. He lived at the standards that he held for everyone else.
Absolutely, yes, he did. And he became the lieutenant governor of the province, and he was an incredibly well-respected individual in the province.
So lesson to leaders is if you want to be able to keep people to high standards and not have many rules, then there's be an example yourself, holding to the standards, having people understand the rules. I mean, not understand the rules, understand expectations, govern themselves, and develop that culture where that's just the way it's done. And that was one of the ways that they sort of got into that flow and performance, was that that's the way they did it.
Yes, and also what's interesting is that the community itself had almost those standards too. I mean, I ran into a few examples in the interviews. If someone in the community saw a grad behaving in a way that they thought was inappropriate, Percy Page soon learned about it.
He heard about it. Yeah. Okay.
Well, so yeah, it wasn't just him. It was, the entire city recognizing the importance of the grads, and therefore they were all under the microscope to a certain extent, and they all had to behave, and in a couple of cases this didn't happen. So
it takes a village to raise a grad, I guess,
I guess so, yeah.
that's very interesting. One of the other concepts that I've come to really think has some value. We talked about value flow and cash flow. There's another thing, and that's in an organization, in a system, there's what you might call energy flow. And that's where people get their motivation and their energy, and you expend it, but it somehow is replenished. And so one way that shows up in the story of the Grads is that they only had 38 players over 25 years.
Mhm.
And so they were able to play for many years without pay, and they keep showing up. What can you tell me any more about that?
Well, again, I think it was part of the culture. I mean, we're dealing with 25 years basically. One thing that he was adamant about is once, and this was, of course, very much true of the times, once a grad became married, they could no longer play on the team. Now, there were a couple who married in secret, and they didn't know about it.
Right, but right before the big game, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, again, we're dealing with a period of time in
Yeah,
which, you know, once a woman was married, they left the workforce. They then focused on their family and so on. And so he was very traditional in
yeah.
that sense. But it is funny that a few of them, a couple of them at least, I know were married when they were still playing. The other thing is, I think, to understand why the team disbanded after 25
Sure,
years.
sure.
And that was the last game was played on June the 5th, 1940. And there are several reasons behind that. First of all, the military had taken over the Edmonton arena,
Yeah,
so that was not really available to them any longer. They've been playing for 25 years, but I think the most important thing was that Page was at this point a very, very busy man. I mean, he was a teacher, he was a school principal, he was a member of the Alberta legislature. And even though he did have under him, he did have other coaches. It just for him, it was just time. I think he was the one that made the decision. Really, that the team that was it. They finished it.
well, and they finished on top in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And they are the most winningest team, I think, certainly in Canada, and I think almost in the world. There is
In
no team that has ever touched them in terms of their record.
any sport. And could you share that record as have you
Well,
calculated it? I know there's different ways.
it in the book, the record always is that they won 520 games. Well, I did a lot of research around that, and that's a little bit exaggerated. But I don't think that's the important thing. The important thing is that no one else has touched this record, and it's just a question of how you add them up and how you come up with the figure. But it's a little bit less than that. But it still represents about a 96% win rate, no matter how you do the statistics.
So 96% win rate. Uh, the smallest city in northern Canada, in the northernest part of Canada for cities of that size. Players didn't get paid, coach didn't get paid. They played as a team. They didn't have any scandals. They played internationally and won. What a great story. And I just want to ask you, what do you studied it so hard? Like, what insight or inspiration do you pick up from the story of the Grads?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's a book that I wrote. Well, the reason I wrote the book was that prior to that I had finished a book called "The Girl in the Game: A History of Women's Sport in Canada," and in the process of writing that book, of course, I knew about the Grads because I've lived here since the early '60s, and but I realized that no one had written a book about the Grads, and so that was the next book. It just followed automatically from that book, and as I did all the research, I thought this is an amazing story. Really is an amazing, and these were amazing women. And to this day, I've subsequently written a few other books after this, but it is the one book for which I get the most requests. The most people have written me from all over saying how much they've enjoyed it. And what is also funny, people write, women write and said, my mother was a grad and you don't write about her. Well, of course she wasn't, because I have all the grads. It could have been that her mother was a gradette.
Sure.
And unfortunately, there were no real records of all the women who were gradettes who didn't make it into the grads. So it is an amazing story, and I've been incredibly grateful for the feedback and the response that the book has had, and the number of people who have contacted me with other stories. It's been really very interesting. When you wrote a book, I wish they all would go like that, but they don't.
No, well, you chose a great story from a great city. I just want to do one shout out, and that is to my daughter Leisha's friend Kalia, whose grandmother Noel McDonald was a standout on the Grads on a team that didn't have stars. But I just wanted to highlight that Leisha was on our last podcast of season 4, and she hung around with Noel McDonald's granddaughter Kalia in high school. They're good friends, and Kalia is really very proud of her grandmother. And I know that the stuff she shared on Facebook was from your book. And so that sense of pride, multi-generational now, what a great story. And I think that I've learned a bunch of stuff about how organizations can run better based on, an example that's right here in Edmonton. So, Anne, thank you so much. If people want to learn more about your work in the Grads, how can they contact you?
How can they contact me?
Yeah, I think I found you on LinkedIn. Maybe that's a hint.
I have a website.
You have a website, that's right.
Yeah, just look up M. Hall, and you'll find my website. And as I say, I respond to. I'm still getting a lot of information, requests, questions, and so on. So I'm happy to respond anytime anyone contacts me.
Well, and you've been so gracious for me to reach out for the blue and join me on these 2 amazing podcast episodes. So, Anne, thank you very much. Thanks to Bryn, and attribute this episode to the 38 members of the Edmonton Grads over the years, and to Jay Percy and Maud Page for the work they did in building Edmonton. So we're proud to have that as part of our community's history. And so until next time, consider your quest.